Okay, welcome everybody. Our guest today is the Reverend Hilary Bond. Hilary is a priest and a climate change campaigner. She's a storyteller and a pioneer, and I hope she's going to share some of her stories with us today, some of which I think perhaps she's written, some of which she's collected, some of which are her own stories and experiences. Hilary and I have known each other for a while now. Hilary and I trained together when we were training to be ordained at Sarum College, and then we were ordained on the same day, and then we had 3 years being curates alongside each other in the same curates group. So if we won't have time for Hilary to share any stories about any of that, we'll just stick to the subject matter today. But Hilary has had to put up with me for a long time, so it's really good to have you with us. Let me add you to the screen. Hi Hilary, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you and I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are all good to go. Lovely, good. Well, let's kick off. I've given you a bit of an introduction, but not said too much. But do you want to tell us where you're joining us from and a bit about your background, who you are and such like?
Okay, so I am joining you from the hamlet of East Holme, which is near Wareham. I'm Wareham born and bred, and I've been there most of my life, except for a few years in London for college, but I'm a country girl at heart. Couldn't wait to get out of the big city at the end of that and come back to some decent countryside. And I'm someone who, looking back on it, although I didn't always see it at the time, has always had a connection with creation. Starting with the pet woodlice on the patio when I was about 3, going on through growing food and gardening with my mum. By the time I was a teenager, I was helping her. She was a primary school teacher by then, and helping her to run eco-orientated courses for children and young people, helping them to connect with creation through all of their senses. I don't know if anybody's ever come across a course by an American called Steve Van Meter. The course was called Sonship Earth, and got people to engage with nature, as I say, through all of their senses, and some great fun activities. So it was always there. I'm now married to someone who's an ecological contractor. He rescues endangered habitat using big machines in an environmentally sensitive way. So care of creation has just always been part of who I am. I think it's in my DNA now. And it's a large part of what I do today as well. In church terms, I started off as a Methodist, accidentally became an Anglican some while ago. Had a conversion experience, felt the need to study a bit more, discovered that when you start studying theology, people start asking, are you thinking about ordination? Spent a few years really honing my explanation as to why ordination was never going to happen and was a really stupid idea. And so that was how I came to be ordained alongside Lewis. What's that, 4 years ago, nearly 4 years ago?
Yeah, coming up 4 years, isn't it?
It is 4 years, coming up 4 years in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So that's a bit about my background and who I am and what I'm about.
Yeah, a little bit. You're kind of involved in all kinds of interesting, or you're beginning to explore lots of interesting stuff. Tell us a bit about maybe your vocation, your ministry, what it looks like, and maybe a sense of how that might be developing. Because you're not a bog standard, if there's such thing as a bog standard vicar. You are not that.
What he's trying to say is I'm not normal. I do hope not. So I've been licensed back to Wareham as a pioneer, and that word kind of gives you all sorts of freedom to do all sorts of things. I'm also non-stipendiary, and I think I'm really fortunate to be in a position of not being paid by the church, because it increases my freedom, because they're not paying me. So if I get it wrong, it doesn't matter so much to them. So what am I doing at the moment? Well, I'm kind of in between places at the moment. I was licensed back to my home parish last September. And obviously since then, a lot of the time we've been in lockdown. So a lot of the things I thought I might be doing haven't really happened. I've always had this particular picture, well, always, for the last few years, a particular picture in mind based around the community cafe in Wareham, where I hang out quite a lot. Now it's open again. And the picture was always a table where there's always room for someone else and there's no such thing as a stupid question. A place where you can be real, where you can say it like it is, which is something I think church doesn't always do that well. It's about building relationships with people, working out, talking with people about what brings them fullness of life or what they think would bring them fullness of life. That's my favorite half a Bible verse, John 10:10. I've come that they might have life in all its fullness. And then maybe working out with people who are not people of faith, where fullness of life might cross over with what Jesus left us, what he did for us, and seeing what grows out of that. I try really hard not to have too many bright ideas because I don't want to inflict my ideas on other people. I want things to grow and be organic and come from what it is that other people need and see where that crosses with Christian community. So a lot of that for a while has been online, doing things like Facebook Live thoughts for the day, writing a blog that's largely nature orientated, using Zoom to do a virtual fire pit as a Lent course, which was all about connecting with God through creation. And now all those sorts of things are starting to disappear. I'm starting to hang out in the cafe again. I don't know where it's going. It feels a bit like Peter getting out of the boat, and there's a huge excitement in that.
Wonderful. And you're a third order Franciscan?
I am.
Do you want to say a bit about that? Of what some people won't know what on earth that means. So I'll throw it there for you to explain.
Okay, so we'll start with Saint Francis. He was a 12th century Italian guy. Started off being a rich, privileged person, had an encounter with God and a leper, and through that came to a place of giving away everything that he had, including at one point all his clothes that he gave back to his father in front of his bishop. I gather the bishop wrapped him up in a cloak quite quickly. But the way that Francis lived was all about connection with God, contemplative prayer, so getting out of the way to be with God in quiet with no distraction, but using that to feed action. So we tend to think of Francis, I'll bet there's probably someone here who's got a bird bath in their garden, which is St. Francis holding a little bowl of water with a bird sitting on it. And that is one way of looking at Francis. He's the patron saint of ecologists. But he wrote just before he died a famous poem, apparently the first ever poem in the Italian vernacular, that's called The Canticle of the Creatures. And in it, he talks about all of creation as brother and sister, brother sun and sister moon, brother fire and sister water. And a big part for me of being a third order Franciscan, that being someone who doesn't live in community, but has an ordinary everyday life, but still makes a commitment to live in the Franciscan way. Lost my thread for a minute. So the idea of all of creation as brother and sister is a really big part of that for me. What does it look like not just to be concerned about creation, but to genuinely think about brother tree, sister leek growing in the garden? What does that mean to have that relationship with creation? Yeah, so it's about living simply, about finding joy in the simple things, which I think lots of us have discovered or rediscovered during lockdown, about walking lightly on the earth and living in harmony with all of creation, not just other people, but all of creation. It's a huge challenge, but a beautiful vision.
Absolutely. Maybe linked into that, we had Harry Baker joined us last week, and we were asking about his favourite poets, and he like about Mary Oliver, and the quote from Mary Oliver, he says, "Instructions for living a life: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it." Which, by the way, for people who were able to, we kind of asked him that question, and we sort of threw him, and he had to think of who he might quote from, and it ended up being his pause for thought on Radio 2 this week. I think we we put something in his mind. But that idea of paying attention, being astonished, and telling her seems to fit very well, perhaps with you and kind of your work, your vocation.
Oh, absolutely. I've got a big thing about slowing down and being aware and really noticing, because it always seems to me that, and I'm thinking in terms of creation here, that you can't really care about something until you have truly seen it. So if I look over my screen at the moment, I can see out of my study window to the bird feeder that is right in front of my desk. At this precise moment, there is a male great spotted woodpecker on it. I'm really easily distracted when I'm meant to be working, and I have spent many happy hours when I should be doing things on the computer, sat at my desk, possibly with a camera in my hand, watching what goes on out there, which is how I now know things like the markings on that woodpecker tell me whether it's male or female. I can tell something from its behavior about the fact that there are almost certainly babies in a nest somewhere that it's going back to feed. That makes it much easier, that level of awareness, to be able to think of that woodpecker as maybe being brother or sister woodpecker. Yeah, I think true caring, true relationship has got to start in awareness and observation, which we do with our partners, our friends, our children, our parents. You know, the more you notice them, hopefully, the more you love them, the more you care about them.
And so where do you meet God within the natural world? I mean, I guess it's really easy to say we sort of see God everywhere in the natural world, maybe the first inclination. Or maybe what have you paid attention today? What have you been astonished by?
What have I been astonished by today? Well, I've been doing a little bit of activism this afternoon, which I'll maybe tell you about later when we start doing that. But I was in Salisbury Cathedral Close, and we were kneeling on the grass, and you know, it's covered with daisies at the moment, and it's stunningly beautiful. And it always amazes me with all sorts of things, but looking at a daisy, there are those tiny little yellow bits in the middle. And then there are petals that when we draw them, we tend to draw as just being white, and that's fine. But if you look at them, they go from a really intense white in the middle, right next to the yellow. And when they get to when they've been open for a while, they are pink on the tips. And I just look at things like that when I've got the time to stop and stare, which is not always. Just that sense of wonder that there is this tiny flower that God has cared about so much, that he's made it so intricate and so beautiful. And I am surrounded on this grass this afternoon by millions of them. I don't know how many there would be, but all of the grass around the cathedral is covered in daisies. And if you stop and think about it, it is a truly wonderful thing. That's just today.
Something today. So perhaps we're sort of leading in this direction. But I wonder about your, obviously your love and care of the natural world, but how that influences your faith practices, or how you combine sort of the way that you perhaps pray, the way you worship God, and how that links with nature, and kind of examples or stories around those kind of questions.
Oh, it's sort of difficult to explain. I think sometimes Christians are quite good at putting things in boxes. And this isn't accusing anybody of anything, but church can be in one box. Doing the housework can be in another box. Doing your job can be in another box. Playing can be in a different box. If you look back through history at Jewish spirituality, the spirituality from which we came, they don't have a sacred secular divide. Life is life. God is in all of it. And I love that idea. although I'm a Franciscan, I'm also really into Ignatian spirituality, which talks about finding God in all things. And again, that comes back to awareness, I think. But for me, I'm a passionate gardener as well. And at the moment, I've got a bit of a thing about soil. I don't know if there are any gardeners here. Any gardeners here?
There will be undoubtedly gardeners here, Hilary.
Okay, so it's nice to know. You will get this, but in terms of the earth, soil is absolutely the foundation of everything. If we don't look after our soil, basically we're stuffed. I was working with one of my schools earlier that are now letting me back in, which is magic. And they've been doing a Nurture Through Nature week. They've basically taken the kids outside for the whole week, and they've done a bit of everything. So there's been maths in it, there's been literacy in it, there's been a bit of den building and a bit of chucking water around. And I did some stuff about soil. So I looked at what's often called the parable of the sower, that I tend to call the parable of the soils, because I don't think it's actually really about the seed or the person who's chucking it around. It's about the state of the soil that it lands on. And there was a lovely sense of wonder amongst the kids when I had my bucket of soil that I'd taken from my garden, and I held a handful of it out to them and said, do you know that science says that there are more living organisms in one handful of good soil than there are people on this planet? Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Somebody's nodding. Is that William nodding? Well,
okay.
But isn't that awesome? Isn't that just amazing? And doesn't it really make you want to look after it? So for me, something that's deeply spiritual at the moment and connects me hugely and almost instantly with God is being in my garden and messing about with soil. Whether it's planting stuff, whether it's potting something on, whether it's pulling the never-ending bindweed out of my veg beds, there's just something about having soil under my fingernails that brings me really close to God. In fact, I could tell you a story about that if you like. Would you like a little bit of a story?
I'd love a story.
Yeah, I'll tell you another one later, because this is just something that happened to me, so it's not really a proper story. But so as a Franciscan, one of the places that I've loved to hang out for about the last 10 years or so, as often as I can get there, is Hillfield Friary. I suspect there are people here who know Hillfield. And when you go and stay there, if you want to, you can join in with what's going on in the community. And because I've been an edge part of that community for a long time, I sometimes get pulled into doing stuff there, which is great. And anyway, so it was, I think it might have been not long before being priested. And I'd gone up to stay for a week, and I was in my happy place, which was out helping in the garden. But I'd also been volunteered to be the Bible reader at the midday Eucharist. And you probably know how it is when you're doing something in church, you kind of keep an eye on the time because you don't want to be the one that shows up late or misses the bit you're meant to be doing. So Hillfield is brilliant because everything is governed by bells. You do not need to wear a watch, which is brilliant because I don't own one. Because whenever there's either worship or food, there's a bell to warn you. So all important eventualities are covered. So I'm out in the garden and it's summer. So I'm wearing shorts and flip-flops and we are shoveling muck. There is a big heap of muck which needs to be got from A to B. So you can imagine, having been shoveling muck for a couple of hours in flip-flops, I'm a bit grubby. And then the 15-minute warning bell for the Eucharist goes. And I think, I'm grubby. What do I do? Do I go and get a bit cleaned up or what? But anyway, two of the brothers were out there in the garden with me, and they've also been doing the same thing. So they're also pretty grubby and they don't go anywhere. So I think, well, okay, I'll just give myself long enough to wash my hands before I go. And I won't worry about it too much. So it gets a bit closer and the brothers start to move. So I decide it's time to go as well. And I go and wash my hands. and I leave my flip-flops, which are actually pretty grim, at the door of the chapel and go in bare feet. I love going to worship in bare feet. And so two things. First of all, I get up to do the reading, and then later on, I get up and we go and make the circle around the altar to receive the bread and the wine. And I'm there in the circle, holding my hands out, and I've still got dirt under my fingernails, and I've got a blister on the palm of one hand, and there's still dirt kind of ingrained, because it gets like that when you've been working hard and gardening seriously. And as the priest came round with the wafer and just said, "The body of Christ," and put this into my dirty hands, the sense of connection with the God that created all that I had been involved with that morning, the sense that in some ways, being out in the garden and shoveling muck and being in the chapel and reading scripture and receiving the Eucharist were all just part of the same thing. That sense of connection was, I don't think I'll ever forget that moment, actually. It was really special.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. No, I guess over all the years, probably about 6 years, we've known 6 or 7 years, we've known each
I know it feels like a long time, Lewis. I get the feeling
too. For both of us. But you've always been passionate about creation and all the things you've told us about. You've told us some of the background there. But I could be wrong here, but it feels like a couple of years ago, perhaps, there was something which changed, or I don't know if something happened where something sparked something in you that you became even more passionate about having a real voice about your feelings about the creation crisis and climate change and such like. Do you want to just say a bit about that? Like I say, I could be wrong, but it felt like something changed a while ago.
No, you are right. And there kind of is a story. So I don't know if you want the whole story at this point, but you can have it if you like.
Yeah, go for it.
So again, this is me. So for the last, I suppose, kind of 8 or 9 years now, I've been someone who's become much more aware of the things that are going wrong with the planet. And the fact that I do not believe that we can carry on living the way that we live now and expecting it to be okay forever. My husband has had a phrase for a long time where he says, people will not realize how serious this issue is until the day that the lights go out, the day that we go to switch our electricity on, and like so many other parts of the world, it's not there anymore. So I had been someone who had signed lots of petitions, who'd written letters to big business. I joined in with lobbying my MP and doing various reasonably low-key bits of kind of campaigning because it mattered to me. And then it was actually summer 2 years ago, and there wasn't a specific event, but it was like something happened inside me, and that was no longer enough. What had been frustration with not seeing anything happen turned to desperation. I was lobbying my MP, talking to other people, and just getting the feeling that people were patting me on the head and saying, there, you go away and play, we'll sort it, and seeing nothing happen, nothing change. And into that kind of change from frustration to desperation, I became aware of Extinction Rebellion and Christian climate action within that. Christian climate action had been around for quite a long time before, but somehow it just hadn't got into my awareness. So I signed up with both of them and registered that there was going to be a rebellion in London that October. And having not been on any sort of protest since I was at college and we were doing CND stuff, I signed up to go to this protest. Do you want the rest of this story now, Lewis?
Yes, please.
So it was really odd, actually, because when you sign up to go to something like an XR rebellion, you can sign up in a particular role if you want to, because there are lots of things that need doing as part of that. And as I'm sure you will be aware, one of those roles is that they ask you if you are arrestable or non-arrestable. So I signed up as non-arrestable and put my name down to work in the kitchen for 3 days and feed other people, because I quite like having a particular place to go and something to do. Coincidentally, I was at Hillfield the weekend before we went and discovered that 3 friends from there, we just hadn't had this conversation, but they were all also going up on the Monday morning when I was going. So we were going to be there at the same time. So this was really good, because I had been a bit nervous of walking into the middle of a rebellion on my own and not quite knowing who was where and how it was going to work. It was a bit scary. So, but now it was okay, because other people were going to be arriving at the same sort of time as me. So we arranged to meet. The plan was that 2 bridges in London were going to be occupied, and Lambeth Bridge, right next to where Justin Welby lives, was going to be the Faith Bridge. We were going to occupy the bridge for anything up to 2 weeks, and it was going to be a mixture of people of all different faiths coming together to say, we want the government to take action on the climate crisis more than it's doing at the moment. And the reason we are doing this is because of what we believe. So we got there on the Monday. It didn't quite work the way we thought it was going to. People took one end of the bridge. I was with a group who'd taken the south end of the bridge right outside Lambeth Palace, and the police stopped us going any further. So we were sat in the middle of the road, different people of different faiths. People got up to speak. We had people like Ruth Valerio from Tear Fund, people from CAFOD. We invited Justin Welby to come out and join us, but he declined the invitation. Bit disappointed with him still. We had people of other faiths doing things. So at midday, a Muslim took the microphone and did the midday call to prayer, which was very beautiful. A Buddhist led us in a half-hour silent meditation. Sat in silence in the middle of the road in London, facing a line of police, the police helicopter buzzing around you. It was a heck of an experience, actually, not something I would have missed for the world. Eventually, they said that we could go round via Westminster Bridge and join the people who were at the other end of the bridge, which was where the kitchen was that I was meant to be in. So we marched round, we sang Amazing Grace most of the way round. Lots of the cars that we were stopping were hooting in support of us. A few were not quite so impressed. A lot of people were taking pictures. A lot of people joined in with the singing and came and marched with us for a way. And they let us go through another police line and join up with the people at the other end of Lambeth Bridge. And there was a bit more of people taking turns at taking the mic and saying inspiring things. And then the mood changed all of a sudden. And we saw them unload in a bit of road near us, a lot more police officers, quite a few vans turned up, and a lot of police got out. And we all looked at each other and realized that something was going to happen. At that point, quite a few people moved off to the sides because they could see what was going to happen and they didn't want to be part of it. And some of us sat down in the road, and I sat down, and I can feel, even telling you the story, the way that my heart was thumping at that point. We sat and watched as some of the police came through where we were sitting and confiscated all of the kitchen equipment. And at that point, something in me really did change. The place that I was meant to be for the next few days had disappeared. And I just got to a point where I couldn't walk away any longer. So going back a bit, as I say, I'd signed up as non-arrestable, but I had devoured all the information about what you do if you're arrested and what it's likely to be like. And in retrospect, maybe there was a reason that I'd soaked all that up. So I sat in the road. I registered that there were 2 other people near me who also had collars on. I didn't know them at that point, but we sat together. We all looked petrified, probably because we were. And then a very nice young police officer by the name of Josh came and squatted down in front of me. And he was really helpful because he said, rather than saying, get out the way, or you're an idiot, or what do you think you're doing? He said, why are you doing this? And that was a great question because I knew why I was doing it. So I asked him if he had children, which he said he didn't. And I said, I'm doing this because I believe the science that says we have what is now, I think, 8 or 9 years to seriously turn this climate crisis around. And I don't want in 20, 50 years time, whatever, for it all to have gone wrong and for my children and maybe my grandchildren to be coming to me and saying, you knew. We remember you talking about this, Mum. You knew. Why didn't you do something? I said, at least by doing this, I will be able to look them in the eye, whatever happens, and say, I did what I could. And he was very sympathetic. And he said, I understand that, but surely there are better ways of doing this than disrupting the whole of London. So I said, well, maybe there are, but I think I've tried them all already. I don't know where else to go except here. And then he said, I'm going to ask you once more if you will move. And if you don't, I'm going to arrest you. Do you understand? So I assured him that I did understand. He looked, I think, more upset than me. I probably reminded him of his mum or something. And he arrested me. And yeah, after that, it got really interesting because there were hold-ups, and the group of us that had been arrested together were stuck on Lambeth Bridge, and it wasn't particularly dry or particularly warm we were arrested at 4 and we weren't taken off the bridge until gone 10 that night. That was a bit of a challenge, but we were allowed to talk. I made some good friends on that bit of pavement on Millbank. And then eventually we got taken to Croydon police station. We were sat all together, 10 of us in a cell. And that was when amazing things started happening. So there were 5 Christians and 5 non-Christians in that room. One of the non-Christians started singing, so we sang together. Then he told a story, and then I told a story, which was a folk version of the gospel. And then somebody else started talking about how a few years ago he'd felt a call to full-time ministry and he hadn't done anything about it. But that someone had given him a particular scripture at that time. So, of course, the rest of the Christians are all going, so what was it? What was the scripture? And he could remember the reference, but he couldn't remember exactly what it said. So we had one police officer keeping an eye on us. And I said to her, can I get my phone out and look the scripture up? Because I've got a Bible on my phone. And she said, no, I can't let you do that because you're not allowed to do that. But she said, if you tell me what it is, I will look it up on my phone. So she looked up, what was it? 2 Timothy, something or the other. She looked it up on her phone, and then she handed me her phone to read this to everybody who was in that holding cell. And it was the bit where Paul is talking to Timothy about, don't worry if people aren't taking you seriously. Don't worry about whether they're listening to you or not. You just do what you're called to do, because sometimes people will only hear what their own itching ears want to hear. And I read out this scripture and the whole cell went quiet. And then eventually somebody said, but that's what we're doing, mate. We're all doing that. That's why we're here, isn't it? and it was just an amazing moment. And later on, well, actually, the next bit was we'd been there for hours and we were really hungry. So capitalizing on the fact that our police officer was being nice to me, I said, I've got an unopened bag of snacks in my rucksack. Can I get it out and share with everybody? Because, if it's unopened, it's safe. They don't want you to take food out in case there's something in it that you shouldn't be having. So she agreed that was okay. And it was like the feeding of the 5,000. Everybody hit their rucksacks and got their bag of snacks out until there was this mountain of food in the middle of the cell. And we were partying. It was just amazing. So the evening went on. It's quite late by this time. I wound up spending a lot of time on my own with Josh, who'd arrested me. You hang on to your arresting officer until they lock you in a cell. We talked life, the universe, and everything. I know the state of his faith. I know his hopes and dreams for himself and his girlfriend for the future. I still pray for him. And then eventually they processed me and he took me to a cell. And before he locked the door, I thought for a minute that he was going to hug me. He moved as if he was going to, and then realized that he shouldn't. So instead of doing that, he took hold of both my hands. And bear in mind, this was 3 o'clock in the morning by this stage. We were both a bit tired and a bit emotional, but he took hold of my hands and he said, "It has been so good to meet you." And then he hesitated for a moment and he said, "And we do get it, you know, we understand why you're doing this." At which point both of us were in tears. And then he shut the door and he locked me in my cell. And I was on my knees in the middle of the floor, overcome with thankfulness, because I knew more intensely than I have ever known in any other place that I was where I was meant to be. And it kind of went on from there. But that's that story.
It's a great story. I've heard it a few times, but it's always always strikes me. As I said at the beginning, please do feel free, if you want to kind of comment or ask Hilary any questions, do put those in the chat.
And I just want to say, I know that not everybody will agree with what I did, and that's okay. You know, I got torn off a strip by some people in my church in public for doing it, some members of my congregation who didn't agree. And that's all right, because everybody can have their own opinion. All I can say is, I believe I was doing what God was calling me to do in that time and that place. But, you know, if you do disagree with me, that's all right.
I think you sort of preempted the question I was gonna ask, whether what kind of flack you got, and from what different avenues. You were a pretty newly ordained priest at that point in time. You were a curate in the Church of England. So how did that play itself out?
All sorts of different things in different places. So I had to go home on the Tuesday night, and on the Wednesday morning I was leading our midweek communion service. So obviously, I mean, the adrenaline hit of doing something like that was like something I have never experienced before. They say adrenaline takes 7 days to get out of your system. I was wired. I'm normally pretty calm and laid back, but for a whole week, people kept saying, "Would you please just stop a minute, stay still?" Because I was just, yeah, that was quite a challenge. But the Wednesday morning communion, I was still quite emotional. I had to tell them where I'd been and what I'd done. My lovely Wednesday morning elderly congregation gave me a resounding cheer, which was very nice. And then I had to say the words of the Eucharistic prayer. There's a bit which says, "Help us to work together until that day when your kingdom comes and your justice and mercy are seen in all the earth." At which point I fell apart, because it was so real and meant so much in that context. I did get it back together. But yeah, on the Sunday, I had to tell all the different congregations what I'd done, because I knew it was going to go out in the grapevine, and I'd rather they heard it from me than from anybody else. One congregation cheered, one laughed. I'm still not sure what to do with that. And in coffee after that service, a lot of people came up to say, you know, "I'm really sorry I laughed. I didn't believe you for a minute. I thought you were joking." And one elderly lady who had a family member who'd been caught up in some of the protests just went bananas and absolutely just laid into me in front of everybody else in church coffee. It's all right, we're still talking to each other, just. But that is all right, because different people are allowed to have their views. My nervousness was the first thing you have to do if you're arrested as clergy, should you ever need to know, Lewis, is you have to tell your bishop. And I was fully aware going into doing it that that it was possible I'd wind up under clergy discipline, and I knew what that could mean. So I'd emailed my bishop from the train on the way home, and got back just an email saying, oh, what did he say? He said, I am really glad that you are safe. I will take advice as to the possible consequences, which is a line that is laden with possibilities. I actually saw him because we were both in the same school on the Monday morning after that happened. And I walked out of a classroom and I'd kind of forgotten he was going to be there. And there he was, standing next to my rector, who is very disapproving. And I'm sure my face just went, what's going to happen now? And he was brilliant. He held out both his hands to me and he said, I am so pleased to see you. And I just sort of stammered, I'm really pleased that you're pleased to see me. I had no idea what was coming next. And he then said, I'm really glad you let me know what had happened as quickly as you did, because if you hadn't, it would have meant automatic suspension. And then he said that someone else had said, he said, I couldn't put this in an email because it's what someone else said, but they had said, but you shouldn't be telling them off anyway, because there was another member of diocesan clergy who'd been with me. You shouldn't be telling them off anyway. You should be giving them a vote of thanks for what they've done on behalf of our diocese. And he didn't go as far as saying, and I agree with what this other person said, but that was the tone of voice he said it in. So he's never said that he thinks that what we did was the right thing, but he's always said he is grateful to Extinction Rebellion for raising the profile of the conversation. And I've always found him to be deeply supportive. But then, being the bishop with the responsibility for all things eco, perhaps he ought to be. Yeah. But yeah, mixed responses. When the story that was in the grapevine went out on the diocesan Facebook page, there were a few unpleasant comments. But like I say, people are entitled to their view, and that's all right. I can justify why I did what I did.
Debbie's asked the question. First of all, she says, unbelievable testimony. I agree with everything Hilary has done. She also says, perhaps this is a question which I suspect a lot of us are sort of working through, and I know it's a question I had before from Joe, and she said, Joe's question, what can we do as individuals? What should we do? And Debbie's is kind of on a more church basis. What does Hilary think we should be doing in our parishes?
Well, I think that varies from place to place. I think the really important thing is please don't do nothing. There's a phrase that somebody came out with, and I can't remember where it came from, but it says silence is compliance. If you do nothing, then you're part of the problem. If you do something, you're part of the solution. And for some people, that will be doing eco church, which is a good thing. For some people, it will be simply making sure that you get all your recycling ducks in a line and do it properly. For some people, it might mean coming and joining Christian Climate Action and being out on the streets with us. Everybody has got somewhere that they fit, but please don't do nothing.
I guess that's the thing. I know for me, and a lot of it is just the same with a lot of issues. You think everything can just seem so overwhelming. There's almost a paralysis within that. Go, oh, it's just so big. I can't even begin to think what I can do. So it's
and
over that. Yeah.
And I get those moments like that as well. So at one point during lockdown, I was really hit by what I think would be called climate grief. You know, just the whole thing is too big. I can't possibly make a difference. It doesn't matter what I do anyway. I'm talking and nobody's listening. But actually, everything that you do does matter. It's just that we've all got a different place that we fit within that. And one of the most important things actually that we can all do, regardless of how old you are or how young you are or how anything you are, is talk about it. You know, if your passion is for recycling, then talk about recycling with people. Tell them why it matters. Tell them about the plastic island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and the fact that they don't want to be part of contributing to that, do they? So talk about it, but do something. Work out what's yours to do, and do it. I'm hopeful that we might be going to run a course about gentle activism before too long, which is sort of activism for people who want to do something but are not up for sitting in a road somewhere or going on a march or anything like that, because it's not for everyone. So yeah, talk about it and do something, please.
Oh, that's a challenge, I think, to both the benefices represented here this evening. Perhaps maybe as we sort of begin over the next few minutes to wind our conversation around to a close, how do you feel about the Church of England's response to the climate crisis? It's made various pledges. It's kind of it's talked about some of these conversations, but where do you think we're at? Maybe fill people in of what the Church of England has agreed to do and your views on that.
There's some good stuff and there's some not so good stuff. So back at not diocesan, at General Synod, is it 2 years ago now? We thought that Synod would agree to try and be carbon neutral by 2050, and they didn't. They voted for 2030, which is fantastic. It's a big challenge and they've got a heck of a job on to do that. But I've been part of a couple of protests, one tiny one today and one slightly bigger one last week, because the Church of England is still heavily invested in fossil fuels. So last Tuesday, a small group of us went to London and staged a bit of street prayer stroke theatre outside Church House. We knelt on the pavement, 6 clergy knelt on the pavement with people dressed as church commissioners behind them. And we prayed a liturgy of lament for the church's part in the desecration of creation through investing in Shell. It was the day of Shell's AGM. And 6 of us knelt there with our heads down and our hands outstretched and let the church commissioners anoint us with fake oil. It was a powerful action. It got noticed by people outside the church. Whether it got noticed by the church commissioners or not, I don't know. Today, there was another action outside Church House in London, which has resulted in one elderly priest being arrested. She's a very special lady, because today is the AGM of Exxon. So the church is still heavily invested in both. The Church Pensions Board is invested in Shell. They are shareholders. Their argument at the moment is that as shareholders, they believe that they can influence what Shell and Exxon are doing from the inside. Shell itself has made promises about investing more in renewables and less in new oil and gas exploration, but they're not. They are putting billions and billions into new oil exploration, and our church commissioners have voted in favour of that motion from Shell. So I do agree that you can change things from the inside, but when you've already tried it for a few years and it hasn't worked, to my way of thinking, you get out. I would love to see the church pull out of investing in fossil fuels. Part of what the reason that I do what I do on this particular matter is because of other clergy whose pensions are being paid by dirty money. I don't want my friends to be in that position, and I am in possibly a better position as a non-stipendiary priest than some of them are to go and get to join in the protest and risk arrest again, because I don't imagine I've done it for the last time. So I think there's a lot of good stuff going on in the church. I think Bishop Nick has done a great job of pushing that green agenda within the church. And that's fantastic. There are other things that are still not so good.
Okay.
I think we need to look really hard at ourselves and be honest about what's going on. Because the fact is, it's quite often thrown at me as an activist. So what is it that makes you better than anybody else? Well, the answer is nothing. I'm not better than anybody else. I'm as complicit as anybody else is in this. But maybe the difference is that I see that complicity and I want to challenge it in myself and where I see it in other people, and particularly in my church, because the church should be able to be in a place to challenge the morality of what people like Shell and Exxon are doing. And if we carry on investing in them, then we're not in that place. We can't be that example to other people that I would love to see the church being.
Sure. Well, we are rapidly running out of time, but have you? I don't know. We've not spoken about this or planned this, but have you got a story or something that you might like to share with us, and then maybe a blessing or something to sort of bring our time to a close?
I have a story and a blessing that I would love to share with you, which
let's finish with that.
So this is a story that I wrote. It's based on bits of scripture. I'm sure those of you who are good at your Bible will recognize the reference to some Bible stories on the way through. But it has a lot to do with my passion for soil. So this is called A Handful of Soil. It all began with a handful of soil. Dust, we sometimes say. But it wasn't really dust, not that dry, weightless stuff that dulls a shiny surface or collects in hard to get at corners, but dust with possibilities, dust with the potential for life, dry, but already loaded with the intentions of God. The Creator breathed life into the dust form that was Adam and set him down to stand on the dust from which he had come. Adam, his senses newly formed and finely tuned, heard the splash and the gurgle as for the first time Sister Water rose from the dust, bringing life to everything she touched. He watched as the first trees, coming from the same source as him, answered the call of their Creator. Come forth. And shoots, then leaves, then branches began to push their crowns towards the smiling face of Brother Sun. Smaller plants appeared, and Adam reached out in joy and wonder to touch the glossy smoothness of the apple and the delicate softness of the petals of the rose. Sweet perfume filled the air, jasmine, lavender, and mint, as our sister, Mother Earth, began to play her part. From this good and fertile soil, the Creator formed every creature that walked, swam, crawled, hopped, scuttled, and flew. But still something was missing. And so, from Adam's now living, breathing dust, the Creator fashioned Eve. He set her down beside him, and sitting back to rest, he saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Then someone else spoke. The serpent's words were not those of creation and blessing, but were crafty and questioning. Had he also come from the good earth and the hands of the Creator? His words brought disquiet, temptation, and the desire for what was wanted, but not needed. Choices were made, forbidden fruit was tasted, and consequences abounded. The serpent would eat the dust upon which he was condemned to crawl. Adam and Eve would live a very different life from now on in a very different place. And the soil, the good soil from which all life had come, through the selfish desire of humankind, it would be cursed. The life that teemed within it would have to suffer not only thorns and thistles, but also the need for those weeds to be torn from it so the people could live. Now, Where there had been joy and delight, there was toil, pain and tears, but also gifts. Our sister, Mother Earth, sustained by God, responded to hard-working hands and brought forth at least enough and often plenty. Children grew, but the curse of self-destructive choices remained until in a fit of jealousy, brother spilt the blood of brother and the ground itself cried out in sorrow and distress. It could have all seemed desperate and dark, but there was always hope, the promise of healing, the offer of restoration. Sacrifices were offered by way of brother fire, and then there was a promise. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin and heal their land. The pattern of human nature repeated. Relationship with God, relationship damaged by bad choices, realization and repentance, forgiveness and restoration, over and over again. The rhythm of life in and around the soil repeated too. Prepare, plant, tend, harvest, over and over again. And for both, the promise remained. Good soil, rich, dark and crumbly, smelling of life, too small to see, but there all the same. Was that what Jesus had in mind when he told them the story of the soils? About the need for soil that was not choked with weeds, not hard and compacted, not shallow and exposed, but alive and ready to receive the seeds. Soil that was ready to wrap the roots in loving, living darkness, even as the shoots wound their way upwards towards brother sun as they had from the beginning. From this, he said, from this good soil, the kingdom will come. The promise remains. Some have heard and understood, but still we take more than our sister Mother Earth can give. We fill our sister water with the plastic we cannot unmake but do not wish to see. And brother wind takes to himself and carries around the world poisons almost unseen but deadly. This we hold in our hands. The promise remains. Eden will one day be restored, and there will no longer be any curse upon anything the Creator has made. Until that day, let us serve with the humility of those who know their kinship with the soil from which they came and to which they will return, along with everything else that the Creator called forth from that handful, that world full of soil. It all began, you know, with a handful of soil.
Beautifully, the cat has joined you just to finish the story.
He does love a good Zoom.
It's one of those special things about Zoom, I think. Animals and children joining us. Thank you so much, Hilary, for your time. Thank you for joining us. I've had various people commenting, I think directly to me, but saying how much they've been moved by and challenged by what you've said. I think I'm always moved and challenged by what you say and what you do, probably more than what you say, but actually by what you do as well. So
thank you. Thank you so much for giving me space to share these stories again. As I say, keep talking about it.
So do you have a blessing to finish out time?
I do, if you've still got time. It's a bit of a long one. And if you're going to say amen at the end, think about what you're agreeing to. You may know this already. This is a Franciscan blessing. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. May God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. and the blessing of God, who creates, redeems, and sanctifies, be upon you and all who you love and pray for, this day and forever. Amen.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you, everyone, for joining us over these past weeks, which I hope you've enjoyed. Please do let people know they're available for people that haven't seen them and catch up on them. Who knows, we may even have another series of conversations at some point in the future with some other guests. We'll see what kind of feedback we get, if people would like that. But whatever you've got on the rest of this evening, whether it's nothing and you're just going to relax, or whether you've got things to do, have a wonderful evening, everyone. And I hope to see lots of you very soon. Okay. Bye, everyone.